hum of my pottery wheel was the only sound that filled my studio that morning. The soft whirring blended with the scent of wet clay and pine carried in through the open window. Outside, the valley shimmered under Montana's pale sunlight. I had always believed that peace was something you built with your own hands, like clay, mold slowly into something that could hold water, or maybe memories. That day, I was shaping a wide-based picture, a design my grandfather once called full of heart. My hands moved in rhythm, clay yielding beneath my palms, the kiln beside me breathing its steady warmth. It was the kind of quiet that felt eternal, until my phone began to buzz. When I saw the name on the screen, my breath caught. MOM.IT had been 10 years since I left Ridgefield, since I slipped out into the night with a duffel bag and a head full of silence. 10 years without a single call. My fingers trembled as I answered. Hello. Her voice was faint, trembling. Elias. Grandpa Harlan is gone. For a moment, everything stopped. The wheel spun without purpose, my chest tightening until I couldn't breathe. I dropped the pitcher. It shattered across the floor, scattering shards and wet earth around my feet. The sound echoed inside me, sharp and final. Grandpa Harlan, my refuge, my only real family, was gone. Mom's voice wavered again. The funeral's in Ridgefield, at St. Mary's Cathedral. Everyone hopes you'll come home. It's time to mend. Mend. The word felt like a cruel joke. Some things didn't mend, they cracked, they hardened, and you just learned to live with the shape they took. Still, I heard myself whisper, I'll be there. When the call ended, the silence in the studio felt heavy. I knelt to gather the broken pieces, my fingers brushing over sharp edges that drew thin lines of blood. I didn't even flinch. It felt fitting, something breaking the moment I tried to shape it into beauty. That night, I packed my old black suit and a photo of Grandpa and me by the riverbank kill. I didn't sleep. I just stared out the window at the mountains, remembering the man who once told me, you don't have to shine brightest, Elias. Just be true to your core. The next morning, I left Willow Creek before dawn. My old truck groaned down Highway 89, the sun crawling over golden meadows and the snow-tipped peaks beyond. Every mile toward Ridgefield peeled back a layer of the life I had tried so hard to bury. The Thorne family home stood as it always had, grand, pale, and cold. A Victorian monument to perfection, surrounded by my mother's lilac garden that smelled sweeter than anything inside its walls. My father, Victor Thorne, was the kind of man who measured worth in achievements and headlines. My brother, Landon, was his mirror, successful, adored. My sister, Aria, was the family darling, forgiven before she ever apologized, and me. I was the one they forgot to notice. When I was a boy, my report card showed 1B in art. My father's face hardened. Planning to be a drifter, he'd asked. From that moment, I understood that silence was safer than trying, but Grandpa was different. Every Friday, he'd pick me up in his rusty Chevy and take me to his riverside cabin. The air there smelled of tobacco, soil, and freedom. He'd guide my small hands on the pottery wheel and say, Clay's honest, Elias. It shows every part of who you are. Be kind to it, and it'll hold your story. When I turned 18, no one noticed I was gone. I took my savings, Grandpa's sketchbook, and rode into dawn without leaving a note. That was the day I stopped being a thorn and started being myself. Now, 10 years later, I found myself standing inside St. Mary's Cathedral. The scent of lilies clung to the air, and the sound of the organ filled the silence between murmurs. My parents sat in the front row, rigid and elegant. Landon greeted me with a half-smile. Aria's tears looked practiced. Only the wooden casket at the center felt real. When the service ended, I stood by the grave as the first clumps of earth fell. My chest ached with the memory of Grandpa's rough laughter, of the way his hands guided mine through every mistake. He'd been more than a teacher. He'd been the one person who saw me when everyone else looked past. After the burial, my mother invited me to dinner. Her voice was polite, but careful, as if speaking too gently might break the illusion of family. I agreed, though every part of me wanted to run. The house hadn't changed. The portraits on the wall still showcased Landon's trophies, my father's awards, and Arya's smiling face. There were none of me. We ate a meal that tasted like silence. Then the lawyer arrived for the willreading.it. It was a small envelope with Grandpa's neat handwriting. The lawyer's voice filled the room. To my grandson, Elias Thorne, I leave my riverside cabin, my studio, and the funds to sustain it. You understand the worth of creation. Nurture it, and don't let it weigh you down. Gasps rippled through the table. My father's jaw clenched, Landon muttered under his breath, and Arya's eyes flashed with disbelief. The rest was a blur of raised voices and accusations, words like selfish and ungrateful thrown into the air like stones. I stood silently, folding the letter and placing it in my pocket. Grandpa's words steadied me. Without another glance, I pushed my chair back and walked out the door. Outside, the air felt sharp and clean. The night wind carried the faint scent of lilacs, and for a brief moment, I thought I heard Grandpa's voice in the rustle of the trees. Don't let them harden you, boy. Clay takes its time, and so should you. I started the truck and drove into the darkness, Ridgefield shrinking in my rearview mirror. Ahead lay the long road back to Willow Creek, to the studio, to everything that had kept me alive these 10 years. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't running anymore. I was returning, carrying both the cracks and the lessons they'd left behind. That night, as the road unwound beneath me, I whispered into the quiet cab, I'll take care of it, Grandpa. I'll keep your light burning. And though the pain still sat heavy in my chest, for the first time in years, it didn't feel like a wound. It felt like purpose.
When I returned to Willow Creek, the valley greeted me with silence. The air was colder now, the river running faster, as if echoing my restlessness. In my studio, the shards of the broken pitcher still lay where I had left them. I sat beside them for a long time, tracing the jagged edges with my fingers. For the first time, I didn't sweep them away. They were pieces of my story, reminders that even what breaks can be reshaped. In the days that followed, I buried myself in work. The wheel spun, clay rose and collapsed, and I began again. Each vessel felt like a confession, each firing a release. But no matter how deeply I immersed myself, Ridgefield still lingered. Messages began arriving, first from my mother, then Landon, then my father. They wanted to discuss the will. I ignored them at first. But when my mother's last message said, "Your father is unwell. Please come," I couldn't silence the pull of conscience. The dinner they arranged was as polished as ever, crystal glasses, folded napkins, and tension so thick it could be carved. My father sat at the head, looking smaller than I remembered. The once commanding figure seemed worn, the years etched into his face. Landon's smile was brittle, Arya's tone carried the same practiced sweetness. "Elias," my father began, his voice measured, "we should talk about Grandpa's property. The land could benefit the family business." I set my fork down. "It's not for sale." Landon leaned back, eyes narrowing. "You've always been selfish. Grandpa meant it for the family, not for one man's hobby." "This isn't a hobby," I said quietly. "It's his legacy." The argument escalated, accusations, guilt, resentment spilling like clay that had spun out of control. Through it all, my mother remained silent, eyes downcast. Finally, I stood. "I won't fight you. But I won't betray him either." I left before dessert, the echo of their disappointment trailing behind me. Back in Willow Creek, rumors began to spread. Someone had leaked stories online, claims that I had manipulated Grandpa, stolen his property. For a while, orders at Quiet Forms slowed. Whispers followed me at the market. The old shame of being misunderstood returned like an old wound reopening, but then I remembered Grandpa's voice. Clay doesn't lie, Elias. It shows what's inside you. So I kept creating. I began teaching free weekend classes for anyone who wanted to learn: orphans, retired veterans, teenagers with nowhere to go. Slowly, laughter returned to the studio. Among my first students were Kai, an orphan with quiet eyes; Mia, a young expectant mother seeking peace; and Raoul, an immigrant craftsman who'd lost everything but hope. They became my little family, their stories shaping the air of the workshop. As they learned to mold clay, I watched something beautiful happen, their brokenness softened, transforming into art. It reminded me of Grandpa's lessons: creation heals, not through perfection, but through patience. Months passed. The studio's energy grew warmer. Word spread about the free classes. Journalists came, curious about the potter who heals with clay. Local papers called Quiet Forms a revival of Montana's artisan spirit. Orders poured in again, not for profit, but for meaning. Then one morning, while I was glazing a new batch of bowls, I read a news report. My father's company had gone bankrupt. Landon was under investigation for financial misconduct. Aria's boutique had closed, and my mother was living alone. For a long time, I just stared at the article. There was no triumph in it, only emptiness. That night, as the valley slept, I drove to Ridgefield. The mansion stood silent, windows dark, the garden wild with neglect. My mother opened the door, eyes red but relieved. Inside, my father sat by the cold fireplace, frail and quiet. Landon avoided my gaze. Aria didn't speak at all. I stood before them and said softly, "I can't change the past. But I can offer a future." They looked at me, confused. "Grandpa's studio is still there," I continued. "It needs rebuilding. If you're willing to work, really work, I'll teach you. We'll start again, together. No salaries, no conditions. Just the chance to create something honest." My father's lips trembled. "You'd help us? After everything?" "Grandpa once said forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's choosing not to carry the weight anymore," I replied. "I'm done carrying." For the first time, silence felt peaceful. They agreed. Over the next months, we rebuilt Harlan's Riverside studio. My father handled the finances with newfound humility. Landon, awkward at first, learned to shape clay with surprising patience. Aria painted glazes, her laughter softening the air. My mother cooked for everyone, her quiet presence finally warm. Slowly, the bitterness began to fade, replaced by effort and small smiles that didn't need pretending. By the second spring, the studio reopened. The first exhibition wasn't grand, just a local fair, but every piece told a story of rebuilding. Our family name, once a symbol of pride, now meant something gentler: resilience. Life began to bloom again. My classes expanded into a foundation called Hands of Hope, where anyone struggling could learn art for healing. We opened new branches, transforming abandoned warehouses into workshops filled with laughter and clay dust. It was at one of these fairs that I met Lila, an art educator from Evergreen City. She had eyes like sunrise after rain, soft but full of life. She admired a piece I'd made, a repaired picture with golden seams running through its cracks. "It's beautiful," she said. "The gold makes it more alive." "It's called kintsugi," I told her. "The Japanese art of mending with gold. The idea is that the break makes it stronger." She smiled. "That's how people should be too." What began as conversation became friendship, and friendship slowly turned into something deeper. We worked together, creating art programs for children and refugees. Her presence was calm, like a steady hand on clay. 2 years later, we married by the Riverside Kill, surrounded by friends, students, and the valley breeze that carried Grandpa's memory. When our son, Theo, was born, he inherited Grandpa's green eyes and curious hands. Sometimes I'd sit him on my lap at the wheel, guiding his tiny fingers through soft clay. "This," I'd whisper, "is where stories begin." He'd giggle and press his hands into the clay, leaving messy imprints that I never erased. They reminded me that beauty didn't come from flawlessness, it came from truth. Years later, as sunlight poured through the studio windows and laughter echoed in the halls, I realized how far we'd come. The boy who once fled Ridgefield had built a home from broken pieces. The man who had feared his family had taught them how to heal. As I watched Lila and Theo shaping clay together, I finally understood Grandpa's last lesson: life, like the earth we mold, will always crack under pressure. But with patience, compassion, and the courage to begin again, even the shattered parts can form something stronger. We are all clay in motion, fragile, yet full of possibility, and sometimes, it takes breaking to discover what we were meant to become.